Donald R. Hammond, Esquire, my hero. How are you?
I'm doing great, Jeff. Thanks for having me again.
Oh, always a pleasure. We're going to talk today about the Capitol Hill organized protest, and the acronym for that is CHOP, unless it's been changed to something new, because they're not very. It's not a very old movement, and it already has been changed. It was previously known as CHAZ, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. I kind of like that. It had a better ring to it. What do you prefer? Are you a chopper or a Chazmeister?
I prefer to go with CHOP, formerly known as Chaz.
Okay. Well, we're referring, of course, to what our president characterizes as domestic terrorists. And I'm inclined to side with the very stable tweeter when it comes to that characterization. These people are often referred to as peaceful protesters exercising their First Amendment right. And I think that's very misleading. First of all, peaceful. If it just means they're not committing acts of violence, okay, fine, but that doesn't mean they're acting lawfully or respectfully. And also, in many cases, they have absolutely no First Amendment right to protest on property they don't own. What do you make of this situation there in Seattle, Don? Does this strike you as a lawful enterprise, or is this more like they're holding their neighborhood hostage?
Well, I'm not sure I can keep track of all the points that I would comment on in your monologue there, but certainly the tweeter-in-chief has been silent on this issue so far as I know for the last several days. And I think his initial comments were based on some misinformation that was put out by Fox News. I think people do have a right to protest on property that they do not own. In fact, most protests happen on property that the protesters do not own. I think we've had conversations before about whether people need a permit to protest on public land, and I don't think they always do. The violence that happened early on, there's some conflicting reports about the source of the violence that happened early on. Certainly protesters say that violence almost exclusively was on the part of the police being violent against completely peaceful protesters. I have some trouble believing that there was nobody in the crowd who was doing any looting or causing any violence toward the police. I mean, we've seen in many of these protests that they've thrown rocks or bottles at police who were standing there peacefully enforcing the peace, making sure everybody stays peaceful. Of course, there's a strong counter argument, I think, to trying to hold these people to being peaceful, and that many, many different methods of peaceful protest have been tried over the years, and it has not achieved results. It has not achieved the parity that they so desperately long for. So, they're escalating their tactics to try to do things to actually get some attention and actually achieve something.
Yeah.
This version of an autonomous zone or organized protest, I think organized is maybe misused here. They don't seem to be very organized inside that zone there. That's maybe the reason I think I prefer Chaz.
Maybe their first priority is to pick a good acronym, and then they kind of just make it fit. Maybe the CHOP came before the organized. What can we have the O stand for?
Right. So I don't really have a major problem with what they're doing there. I think
not.
I think the police have left, and they're running their own little society there. I don't they haven't tried to declare that they're a sovereign nation or anything like that.
Right.
And they seem to be getting along just fine internally. They're peaceful. They're encouraging local businesses to open, and they're patronizing those local businesses.
Isn't that nuts?
I think that for the most part, they're doing okay. I think there are people who are afraid to go back to their homes and afraid to enter, and that's certainly a problem. But I think this is not sustainable for the long term. I think a year from now, they're not still going to be there occupying this 6-block area. And I think many of their 31 demands are rather outlandish. Some would be constitutionally impermissible. But some of them, I think there's room for discussion. And I think it's very common in negotiations to start with some completely crazy demands so that you have room for negotiation to actually achieve something.
Negotiation, though you don't seem to be willing to accept that framing. And you're saying this from the comfort of your home office. I won't say where it is, but it's somewhere between San Diego and San Francisco.
That's absolutely true.
Let's see what the residents in the CHOP area have to say. Here's just about a minute from a news report broadcast by a Seattle TV station.
We're not even here most of the time, and it's terrible to live here right now. It's just not conducive.
To Surjan, it's his backyard. He's only comfortable using his first name. He lives in one of the apartment buildings bordering Cal Anderson Park, and here's video he shot of what his block looks like now.
What you want from a home is a stress-free environment. You want to be able to sleep well. You want to feel comfortable. We just don't feel comfortable right now.
So Surjan and his fiancée are leaving. They'll stay with family for the next week. Their complaints aren't unique. We've received emails from many that say they have real concerns about living inside or near the Capitol Hill organized protest zone, an area that police have publicly said they won't respond to unless there's a significant threat to life. Noise complaints aren't very high on that list.
But we need to find some sort of compromise where we can continue on with our lives. And they can continue to do whatever agenda they have for themselves.
What is your message to frustrated residents that have complaints about loud music, about being uncomfortable with being home, walking in and out at night? What do you say to them?
If that discomforts them, I can't imagine how they feel about black people being murdered by police.
And every day they march from CHOP to the precinct. I think it's the West Precinct of the Seattle Police Department. And they walk on I-5, which is a freeway. And the police are very accommodating for the protesters. They close the freeway for them when they do that. And here we have a statement from a Washington State Patrol trooper who says, "We're there to support their First Amendment right to march and say what you need to say. But on the freeway with cars, it's just not a good thing." Well, it is not a good thing, and the way they resolve it is in favor of the protesters, not the people who want to use the freeway for its intended purpose. So you and the troopers seem to be of the same mind about this First Amendment right, yet you do concede that sometimes a permit is needed. They can't just protest anytime, anywhere. I'm kind of thinking that after people have invaded a neighborhood, been there a couple of weeks, stopped traffic on the freeway every day, maybe then it's starting to inch toward the point at which maybe a permit is needed and we just don't give in to everything they do for the rest of our lives. What do you think about that, Don? How close are we to that point?
Well, the government can certainly place reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions on a protest. And I think that, these people have taken over a 6-block area. I think the government would be within its rights to clear them out, but I think it's really bad optics. And, there were some comparisons drawn to, these protesters took over or protesters like them took over a similar area. Maybe it was a bit smaller back during the Occupy movement in 2011.
Oh, yeah.
And the police went in and cleared them out after about 3 days. I think that we have a different situation here where the object of the protest is the police. So you have some really bad optics where the police come in with a heavy-handed use of force to clear them out, exactly demonstrating what the people are railing against. So it's a really difficult situation for the police to figure out how to address that.
Right. And Trump is a factor, too, to some extent, because, they may be baiting him to come back with some of these heavy-handed, him calling for heavy-handed tactics, whether it's the National Guard or whatever. And then they can portray him as being this oppressive character. So I get that. But it doesn't mean that the law is being upheld properly. And you still haven't really said anything. Well, I guess you did. You did say you can see that they're past the point where they just have this right. In other words, I'm not saying that every time a group of people get together and they start talking about what they believe in, they need a permit, just because they're a group of people in public gathering. But you do concede they've taken over this territory, and that's sort of a different situation, right? And the neighbors may have some, or should have some say in the matter, correct?
Yes, I think that it's a problem that some people who live there do not feel safe. Certainly your single anecdotal video of one guy provides some evidence that there's at least one person who's not happy about the situation. And I'm sure that there are others. I don't know that a formal survey has been done to see, how many people feel that way. I think there are a lot of people, who do live in the area who are participating. So it's a mixed group. I do believe that they are, outside the scope of their rights, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the government has to or should put a squash on it. I think,
Right.
I think the thing will collapse on itself internally, probably within a few more weeks. And if the government can wait that out and let that happen, I think that would be the best way to show that this method of takeover is not sustainable and that it's not going to get them what they want, is to let it fall apart on its own rather than going in heavy-handed.
Yeah, well, there is an argument to be made, and you just made it well, that it might be the best tactic, and it just inflame the situation. But you also alluded to something that we touched on just briefly in an earlier podcast, which is that the police don't have the obligation to enforce the law. And I think some of it has to do with endangering themselves. And also, it just seems like a very practical, common sense thing that it's impossible to enforce every law. So you can't be leaving the police vulnerable to lawsuits just because they haven't enforced the law, because they're are always a bunch of laws they aren't enforcing.
Sure.
So
in general, I advocate for police exercising more discretion than they usually do to leave alone small time, petty crimes, give people warnings, let them know, hey, that's not okay, but let them go. Rather than attempting to arrest people for things like selling loose cigarettes or trying to pass a $20 counterfeit bill, or even some DUI situations where nobody's in danger and somebody's car is sitting in a parking lot. I think,
right.
These situations where the police get heavy-handed. So the real core of the issue is, well, it's policing in our society, but it's also a matter of the laws that we choose to pass in our society. And we need to have a careful understanding that every law we pass sets up an opportunity for dangerous and lethal encounters with law enforcement. Every law there is, every time a police officer responds to a situation because we've decided as a society to make a law, every single time there's a chance that encounter can turn very dangerous and even deadly. And I think we need to think about that more carefully, within the legislature and within the public when we're voting on referenda and when we're creating laws and legislating new laws. Think about it. Is it worth somebody's life for this thing to be illegal?
All right, I want to dig a little deeper on this doctrine, I guess you would call it, that holds police can't be sued for not enforcing the law. And I get your logic, and I also totally trust you that this is established case law and all that. But on the other hand, I don't know if every possible angle has been explored. And, there are always opportunities to reconsider issues. So if you'd be kind enough just to open your mind about this a little bit and consider again the perspective of law-abiding people who are having their lives disrupted over and over again over sustained periods of time. Is there not only a moral objection there, but is there no potential for a lawsuit? When, for example, the freeways are turned over all the time, or this neighborhood is turned over for a long period of time, and the law-abiding citizens are just told tough, you just have to take it. Is there no potential for any lawsuit there?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, I can't think of a possible cause of action that could stick, but reasonable minds may disagree. If you talk to 100 lawyers, you might find one who's willing to take that case and try to sue I don't know who, the state of Washington, the city of Seattle. I don't know, but and for
Right.
what are their damages? I mean, if somebody was actually excluded from their home, maybe there's some, rental damages there. I don't know. I can't think of a cause of action that would be appropriate against the government for allowing the protests to go on.
Well,
You may want to sue the protesters, but good luck. I mean, I don't know how many of them have any funds that you're going to recover.
Well, the cause of action, I guess there could be any number of things. People's safety is put in jeopardy. Now, if anybody actually sustained injuries because of that, there would be a possible cause of action. Also, but they're being deprived of the use of property that they're entitled to use. That this property has been turned over to the hostage takers.
And your cause of action, I think your cause of action for that is against the people who are actually depriving you of the use, or the people who are actually committing the violence. If there's violence happening, then you sue the person who hit you. You don't sue the police for not stopping them. The police, especially with respect to violent crime, the police are a reactionary force anyway. There's nobody that can stop me from, killing somebody in my own house. The police aren't there. Then the police can't stop a domestic violence incident. They're just not there. They're a reactionary force. So you can't sue the police for not stopping something.
Well, these protesters are negotiating, and you just sent me right before our broadcast an article that outlines 31 demands they're making. I don't know to whom they're making these demands. I don't know who has the authority to even give in on any of this stuff. It's just mind-boggling to me. And the guy in the news report is talking about it the same way. We have to strike some compromise with them. Who are these people? Why should anybody have to compromise with them? They have no right to be there. And I don't know. I have mixed feelings about even dealing with, even addressing these 31 demands. I read news reports that refer to only 3 demands. On the other hand, if they really are making more demands, we shouldn't let that be ignored and, just assume that the news media is covering it. But the 31 demands, does that really speak for all the hostage takers or only some of them? They're absurd demands, Don, right?
The demands are directed at the mayor and the city council. And I think really these people would like the mayor to resign. I've seen several calls for that. And that's a Democratic mayor. So it's not like these are just, lefties, fighting against righties. I think many of these people are so far left that they think the mayor is not left enough for them, even though he's a Democratic mayor. But yeah, I mean, they have demands that are against the state of Washington, demands that are against the city of Seattle, the mayor, as well as the Seattle City Council. And many of them are completely outlandish and not even possible to consider. A lot of them are just non-starters, but there are some things there that we could, at least talk about and see if there's room for improvement. I think we can all agree that many of us in our personal lives have room for improvement, and that society as a whole has room for improvement. So I don't see any danger in at least talking about, some of the concerns and talking about where some systemic issues do exist in our society and figuring out ways to address those. But these things are all very complicated. They're not going to happen overnight.
I love Julia Burdick, by the way. Look at this. She said she loves our show, and now she's saying she agrees with Don. I don't know about what, but whatever, as long as she agrees with you about something. Too few people understand what Don just said. The police rarely stop crime. They just react to it, investigate it, if you're lucky. Well, yeah, I mean, that's why I prefaced the whole thing by saying I totally get what he's saying and agree with established case law, but we have some unusual circumstances here which have prompted me to say, well, maybe we should look for an angle here. So the 3 demands that have been in the various news stories I saw are to defund the Seattle Police Department, to invest in the black community, whatever that means, and to release protesters who have been arrested during this time frame. The so-called George, what's George's last name?
Floyd.
George Floyd protests. But then some of these other, in the 31 demands that you sent me, they want the abolition of prisons, free college. They want black nurses and doctors only to treat black patients. Who is going to even negotiate with them about this?
There's a lot of things on there that are absolutely ridiculous. I think, free education is something that we can have a national conversation about. There are certainly a lot of places in Europe that do that. I'm not sure it's an appropriate model for the United States, but it's something we can at least have a conversation about. I'm not opposed to that on its face if we can find a way to make it work.
We can have a conversation about anything, but this is hostage takers presenting it as a demand.
Sure, and I think that a lot of that is, they're saying it's a demand, but I would take those as requests and an opening salvo in a negotiation. That they're not going to get all of their 30 some things that they're asking for. That's just not even possible. And I think it's important to point out that their demand of defunding the Seattle PD, they appear to truly mean 100% defund that police department and do something else. Whereas generally, I think that defund the police movement is, I think it's a poor name for something that might be a more reasonable conversation to have, but by labeling it as defund the police, you're not making any allies amongst people who really could be allies in the movement. You're alienating people because it sounds like a complete, oh my God, we're going to have no police on the streets and we can't have that. Whereas most people who are saying defund the police don't actually mean 100% defunding. But that does appear to be what these people up there at Chaz Chop mean, is 100% defund Seattle PD. And that's not going to be feasible. But again, maybe that's their opening salvo, and maybe cutting the budget by 20% and investing that in mental health and other resources will be sufficient by the time you actually get to the negotiating table.
Right. I've noticed that too. Some people just want less money to go to the police and more to social programs or whatever, whereas others just want to completely abolish the police. But then I have to disagree with you about it being a demand. I mean, I get what you're saying about, hey, it's a negotiation, but it is a demand in the sense that they're occupying that space and they ain't leaving. Now, Curtis Nishiyama referred to when the police abandoned the police station. I can't remember if that was in Seattle or somewhere else, but I know there was at least one incident when they just gave up and left.
So they torched a police station in Minneapolis. The Seattle Police Department has given up. I think it's East Precinct that they left, but it doesn't appear that anybody has destroyed that police station. And I've actually seen photos the last couple of days that there appear to be some police officers creeping back into the station. So I was originally under the impression that once they left, the protesters would move in and take over the police station. And that apparently hasn't happened. And they certainly haven't torched it like they did in Minneapolis. So maybe this is a more peaceful breed of protesters in Seattle than we saw in Minneapolis, because they haven't torched it. They haven't even moved in to, make use of the resources that are in there.
Right.
And police apparently are making their way in the back door occasionally to have a look around.
Maybe it's not grounds for a lawsuit, but it certainly the people who live in that neighborhood are being deprived of services from the police because they just gave up and they left.
I think that's true, and I think that there are, the police have said they're not going to respond to 911 calls unless there's a threat to human life, and maybe that's okay. Depending on what the calls are and whether there's actually a threat to anybody. Maybe it's okay that they don't respond. I don't know what kind of calls would be coming in from that neighborhood in the first place. Certainly there may be vandalism calls right now and noise complaints and things like that, and that's a concern, but it's not the kind of thing where they're going to risk their lives to go respond.
It's okay if that's what the people who live there voted they want, but it's not okay to happen in the context of these people holding the community hostage. Now, here's Curtis trying to get a little provocative here, almost turning this into a race war. I'm just kidding. Black actors, black mayors, nice black people, as opposed to the angry black people or whatever, are totally against defunding. Well, also, it looks to me from just watching all the different videos that most of the protesters are actually white. Would you agree with that, Don?
I think you have a polyethnic movement going on in this country that many people support. And I think that's certainly an interesting facet of this that is different from some historical protests, that you really have people, who are open to looking at it. And I think there are some black people who are against it, and there are many black people who are for it, and there are some white people against it, and there are many white people for it. I don't think you can categorize people, and I think that's actually the point of the movement: is let's stop categorizing people according to their immutable traits, and stop trying to pigeonhole people based on the color of their skin. I think that's the point. So to say that, well, some black people think this and some black people, I think you're missing the point there.
One of their demands is they want black doctors and black nurses only to treat black patients.
I think that's probably a non-starter as well. Can you imagine if I went into the hospital and said, no, I only want white doctors to touch me? I wouldn't say that. It's not the way I feel, but I think it's also absurd.
Also, the whole Black Lives Matter thing in response to these police incidents, it's some of the time implicit and other times explicit that they think it was motivated by racism, when that's only a mere possibility, right? There's no.
Sure. There are certainly
these police officers did whatever they did because they hate black people. None.
There are incidents where black people are killed by police, and it was not a racial incident. I think that what we saw with Mr. Brooks in Atlanta is one such incident. I don't think that his race played any part of what happened there. With respect to George Floyd, that's a tougher call. I don't know what was going through Chauvin's head at the time, but I think that there are people coming forward who say that he did have prior problems with Floyd in particular, but also that he had made some racist statements, and maybe his biases played a role in that one. But when you look statistically at the rates, the number of police killings per million people in the country, the number of black people killed per million people is way higher than the number of white people killed per million people. So there's something going on in the system. I certainly wouldn't say that everybody every white person killed by the police is killed because they're white. And I don't say that every black person killed by police is killed because they're black, but there's something in the data there that indicates that we have some police who have some biases, and they come out in the policing, and that's a problem. And that's a conversation that we need to have. And, that conversation certainly may lead to changes in the way that we choose to police different neighborhoods.
Well, I don't think that the data actually supports your premise, and I think that if it did, the people who are leading this protest movement would be focusing on it, honing in on it, saying it over and over again. And it's a little difficult for us to just speak extraneously about it, and we can maybe follow up with a closer look at these statistics after we had an opportunity to look at them. But first of all, it's just not true that because there's X amount of blacks being treated in a certain way that it was improper. Maybe the encounters happened because there's a higher percentage of blacks committing crimes, right?
I would again invite you to read a wonderful book by Professor Jody Armour. I actually happen to have it within reach today. I pulled it off the shelf last time I recommended it to you. It's called Negrophobia and Reasonable Racism by Professor Jody Armour. I have begun rereading it, and I think that it completely debunks any argument of reasonable racism that you're trying to make. And he says it much better in these, let's see, these are notes. So 157 or 8 pages. He says it much better than I could. It's a quick read. I invite you to grab a copy or borrow mine.
All right. Well, I think that the movement, for it to be successful, can't depend on Americans or Jeff Norman reading that book. There has to be a succinct way of saying it. But I'll read the book. So, but don't you agree that it's a little hard to persuade people if they have to read a book to get the argument?
Well, I think that it's false that any higher percentage of crime is actually committed by Black people. And that's, I think, the reasonable racism argument that you're trying to make is that it's reasonable to be afraid of Black people because they commit more crime. And I think that's false.
Well, I didn't actually say that. I said that is a factor to consider, as opposed to just saying, there are X amount of incidents, because to say the number of incidents doesn't say anything about why the police and the Black people were interacting. So, but I would agree if the statistics show that in fact these interactions have no justification, then that should be known. I mean, again, where are the Black Lives Matter leaders or anybody who cares about this issue? Where are they, and why aren't they highlighting this alleged statistic?
I think they absolutely are. And I see multiple times a day different versions of it being posted on my Facebook wall. I'll be sure to start tagging you every time I see it so that you can jump on that and get a perspective on it.
Okay. So look, whether I'm right or wrong, I think any reasonable person can agree that it's difficult to speak extraneously about this particular thing. We have to take our time and look at it. So let's do that when we can, then we can come back and revisit it. Now, Curtis is awfully motivated to express himself today. 1,500 events a day of Black on white aggravated assault within the nice Black population. I think he's being sarcastic about nice Blacks. I'm not sure. Are 2% of the 15? I don't know what the hell that means. Can you figure that out, Don?
I'm sure if I took the time to parse it and maybe add a few commas, it might make some sense. But this looks like playing with statistics that, of course, can be manipulated any way we want. So. Yeah, I'm happy to take a look at the links and see what's going on there. I mean, certainly there is Black on Black crime. Certainly there's Black on white crimes. I mean, that these things exist, and I mean, there are systemic issues. I mean, certainly historically in this country, the way that we have treated minorities is not stellar. I think we can certainly agree that 170 years ago we were not treating everybody equally, even if you want to try to say that we are today, and. I think at least some percentage of the poverty that we see today, I think statistics would bear out that there are, a greater percentage of poor people who are Black, or a greater percentage of Black people are poor than there is a percentage of white people. That may be the way to say that. I think that's probably true. And I think that there are, historical factors that come to bear on that. And that's, perhaps one solution is what these Chaz Chop folks have suggested of having free education to try to level the playing field. That's something I think that's a conversation we should have, of ways to continue to level that playing field and assure that there's equality of opportunity for everybody.
All right. So that's our homework assignment. We're going to look into the statistics some more, and we're going to consider some of these ideas. And I, for one, am much more open to considering them when it's not a demand by people who invaded a neighborhood. But
I understand that. And, as a country, we've had a longstanding policy of not negotiating with terrorists. And, to the extent that they're not violent, I don't consider them to be terrorists. I don't think that they're, at this point, they're certainly not throwing rocks and bottles. I haven't, other than Fox News's fake photoshopping, I haven't seen any actual evidence that there are any firearms even in there. And it would seem odd if there were, since this is largely a far left crowd that would advocate the banning of firearms. So
Right.
I would see that as probably as rather hypocritical if they were all walking around strapped in there. And I would take it as an argument toward, something that closer to what I would believe, that I think that I think we should have more of an armed society. So, I think these are all complex issues.
Yeah, and I think that they don't deserve all that much credit for their relative nonviolence, given that they have invaded the neighborhood and the city and residents have surrendered. We're not quite sure how peaceful these protesters would be if the community didn't surrender to them.
I'm not sure they've surrendered. I mean, people are allowed to go in. They're not excluding anybody from this zone. People are allowed to go home. People are allowed to go to their businesses. People are allowed to walk through and be tourists if they'd like to.
Julia, who loves you and our program, is now challenging you. I like Julia. She wears many hats.
Well, seeing as how I don't have control of the StreamYard, I have not loaded anything up that we can put on the screen now. But yes, it has been conclusively proven that Fox has photoshopped armed people into photos of the Chaz chop at the beginning of it. I think they've since backed off of that, but it has been conclusively proven. Yes.
Okay, I doubt it happened very much. What we can do is post stuff like this in this very same thread that has the broadcast afterwards. So if you feel so inclined, Don, to post something there for Julia to see later, tonight, tomorrow, 2 days from now, whenever, that opportunity exists. Same thing on the statistics, not just Don, but anybody who wants to give us a statistic or two that might be relevant and a link. That would be great. I have watched each of the Citizen Jeff videos, enjoyed them very much, all of them. Oh, bless you, Curtis. The Citizen Jeff videos would be nothing without our hero, Don Hammond, Donald R. Hammond, Esquire. Caitlin Masters, ladies and gentlemen. Look at that beautiful woman, and a link. We can't click on it in the broadcast, but we can click on it later in the Facebook thread. Thank you, Caitlin. I don't know what. Fake image. Okay.
I think that's showing that Fox News is photoshopping. I think that is proof of that Julia was asking for.
Yeah, that's probably what it is. And I said I doubt happen very much. I wouldn't be
Our
shocked.
Completely unbiased fan, Caitlin Masters, has saved us and put that link in there.
I wasn't going to say what her relationship is to this situation, but maybe you want to. No? Okay, I guess you don't.
Never heard of her.
All I can say is she's not my wife. I'll just leave it at that. I wish I were that lucky. And again, I want to repeat, I said I doubt it's happened very much. It wouldn't shock me if that happened once, though.
Yeah, I'm not sure that it has happened repeatedly. It certainly has happened at least once. And that's, that's deplorable enough. I think they learned their lesson when they got caught the first time and have, hopefully they'll not do that kind of nonsense again.
All right, Don, let's go eat and drink.
Sounds great. Let's find an open patio.
Shall we? Oh, yeah, that's what Don and I are negotiating, and it is a negotiation. And we're going to find a place where it's safe, where the drinks are flowing, where the people are free, blacks, whites, yellow, everybody gets along.
Hey, I know a place in Seattle that's open. Maybe we can go up and pay a visit to the Chaz Chop and hang out there and have a meal.
All right, let's go to Seattle. Then we can do some on-the-ground reporting about that.
I think Southwest flights are super cheap right now. It's actually doable.
I bet it is, too. And hotel rooms are probably cheap now, too.
Well, they've set up tents in the Chaz Chop. We don't need a hotel.
All right, if any of you protesters want legal representation, Don is available. And if any of you want law and order, you can contact me. Take it easy.